I used to believe I understood pain, not the kind you fix with time or distraction, but the kind that sets up home inside your bones. The kind that doesn't fade, just changes shape, waiting to remind you it's still there. For the longest time, I thought I'd already climbed my mountain of grief, reached the top, and learned to live with the air up there, thin, cold, lonely. When my wife, Ellen, passed away 10 years ago, I thought I'd experienced the worst a man could feel. I'd held her hand as she took her last breath in that small bedroom we built together from scratch. The walls still smelled like sawdust and lavender back then. I remember the sound of the wind outside, how it blew against the window as if it wanted to come in and take her too. That day, the world didn't just lose her. I did. My compass, my home, my reason for everything. For years, I walked around like a ghost. I kept her photos up on the wall, every one of them. But I stopped looking at them because every time I did, it felt like being punched in the chest. People told me time would fix it. That grief gets easier. But they were wrong. It doesn't get easier. It just gets quieter, sneakier. It hides in your habits, in the way you fold the laundry she used to do, in the way you cook too much food for one person. I told myself that was all the pain I'd ever know, that there couldn't be anything worse than losing Ellen. But life has this cruel way of showing you that pain doesn't always come from loss. Sometimes it comes from love itself, from the way you give it, from the way it's taken advantage of. Because nothing prepares you for finding out that the person you thought you were saving was actually saving herself from you. My name's Richard Moore. I'm 58 years old. I spent most of my life building things, homes, fences, furniture, anything you can make with your hands and a hammer. I thought I knew how to fix what was broken. But what happened next, what this story is about, showed me that not everything broken wants to be fixed. And not everyone who looks helpless really is. It started one cold morning, just outside Boise, Idaho. The kind of morning where your breath comes out in clouds and the whole world feels frozen in place. Snow blanketed the front yards, trucks were warming up along the street, and the smell of coffee drifted out of kitchens like little pockets of comfort. I remember the sound of the old radio humming in the background as I slipped on my boots, ready to do what I'd been doing for months, taking care of Anna. Now, Anna wasn't family. She wasn't an old friend either. She was someone I'd met by chance about a year earlier, and somehow over time she'd become part of my days. She lived a few blocks over, in a little white house with a broken fence and peeling paint on the porch. People around town knew her name, though not everyone knew her story, just bits and pieces. They said she'd been in a terrible car accident years ago. Some said it was her fault, others said it wasn't. Either way, she ended up paralyzed from the waist down, lived alone, barely got by on disability checks and the kindness of others. And kindness was something small towns never ran out of, at least not on the surface. People pitied her. You could see it in the way the cashier at the grocery store bagged her things slower, or how the mailman placed her letters neatly so she wouldn't have to reach too far. But pity doesn't last long. Eventually, people get used to seeing tragedy. They stop noticing. That's where I came in. I don't remember the first time I really noticed Anna, not just as the woman in the wheelchair, but as someone I wanted to help. Maybe it was that morning when her groceries spilled across the parking lot, or the afternoon I saw her struggling to shovel snow with a little hand spade. She was stubborn about it too, said she didn't want to bother anyone. But I couldn't just stand there watching, so I helped. That was it. That's how it began. At first, it was just small things. Fixing a porch step, patching a leak under her sink, dropping off some soup when the weather got bad. But over time, those small things turned into habits. Routines. I'd wake up early, pour 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for her, and drive over to her place before sunrise. She'd already be awake, sitting by the window with a blanket over her lap, that same sky blue cardigan wrapped around her shoulders. That cardigan. I still remember it like it's sitting on the chair beside me. Faded around the elbows, a loose thread hanging from the sleeve, but always spotless. She said it used to be her mother's. Every time I looked at it, it reminded me of someone who was trying to hold herself together, fragile but neat. Anna had these soft brown eyes that could look right through you when she listened. She didn't talk much at first, but when she did, her voice had this calm, careful tone, like she was choosing her words one at a time so none of them would hurt too much. She told me she'd been a school librarian before the accident. Said she missed reading to kids, the smell of books, the quiet of that old brick building. Sometimes she'd ask me to bring her novels from the thrift store, and I'd sit there, on her porch while she read out loud, her voice steady but a little shaky when the wind hit. Helping her made me feel like I was doing something right again, like I had a purpose. When you've lived alone long enough, you start craving a reason to wake up early. A reason that isn't just habit, and Anna became that reason. I told myself I was being kind, generous, doing what a good man should do. But if I'm honest, I was doing it for me as much as for her. Because every time she smiled, every time she said, "Thank you, Richard," in that soft way of hers, I felt a little less empty. People in town started noticing us, the retired carpenter and the quiet woman in the wheelchair. Some joked that we were like an old married couple already. I laughed it off, but deep down I didn't mind the thought. After all, Anna was kind, gentle, and seemed to need me. And maybe that's what every lonely man wants at the end of his life, to feel needed again. But here's the thing about peace, it never lasts, and when it goes, it doesn't go quietly. The peace I'd found with Anna, that quiet, steady rhythm of helping her, of feeling useful again, was about to be ripped apart, torn away from me piece by piece, until I didn't even recognize the man I'd been, because a few months later I'd find out that Anna's condition wasn't what it seemed, and the truth behind it would break me in ways even Ellen's death never did. That day, the day I saw what she'd been hiding all along, was the day I realized that some people don't wear pain, they wear masks. And I'd spent months loving a mask. It's strange, looking back now, how something that feels so pure in the beginning can turn out to be the very thing that destroys you. I guess that's the cruel poetry of life. You think you're doing something good, something selfless, and before you know it, that same kindness becomes the blade that cuts you open. It all began about 2 years before that winter morning, the day the truth came out. I had just retired from carpentry after nearly 40 years of hard, honest work. My hands were rough like old bark, the kind of hands that carried decades of building other people's dreams while quietly burying your own. I used to joke that I could tell the weather just by how stiff my fingers got in the morning. Retirement was supposed to be peace, but instead, it felt like standing in an empty room after the laughter's gone. My house, once filled with the scent of my wife's apple pie and the echoes of her humming, now felt like a museum of ghosts. Every chair creaked like it remembered her sitting there. Every room carried her memory in the dust motes that danced through the sunlight. My son Daniel lived all the way in Oregon. We hadn't spoken properly in months. He was busy with his own life, and I never wanted to be the kind of father who begged for attention. So I stayed quiet. I stayed alone. Then one morning, it must have been early autumn, I was at the general store in town. The kind of place that still sold penny candies and where the owner knew everyone's middle name. The air had that bite of the season changing, the smell of cold earth and rain. That's when I saw her. She was outside, struggling near the sidewalk. A small woman with chestnut hair tied up in a messy bun, and a sky-blue cardigan that looked a size too big. Her wheelchair was stuck in a patch of gravel near the curb, and her grocery bag had tipped over. Eggs had cracked, milk was leaking through the paper, and a loaf of bread was rolling toward the gutter. I didn't think twice. Instinct, maybe, or just the reflex of someone who spent his life fixing things. I jogged over, bent down, and started picking up her groceries. "Don't worry about it, ma'am," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Looks like the road decided to pick a fight with your wheels today." She laughed softly, a small, nervous sound. Her voice was warm with a little tremble that made her sound fragile. "I'm sorry," she said, cheeks turning pink. "I usually manage just fine. Guess it's not my day." "Everyone's got one of those," I replied, brushing off some dirt from a can of soup and putting it back in her bag. That was the first time I really looked at her. Really saw her. Her eyes were green, soft but sharp in a way that made you think she noticed everything. She had a small scar near her temple, just under her hairline, like an old reminder of something she didn't talk about. There was sadness in her smile, too, the kind that tells you she's seen the darker side of life. Her name was Anna. She'd just moved into a small rental place on Birch Street, a few blocks from my house. Said she'd been through an accident, that her legs hadn't worked properly since. She spoke about it with this calm acceptance, like she'd already cried all her tears long ago. She told me she used to be a librarian, that she loved books because they let her escape her old life. She never said much about what that old life was, only that she'd left it behind, and that was enough for me. I didn't ask questions. You learn not to when you've been through your own kind of hell. Some stories hurt too much to tell, and sometimes silence is the only kindness you can give, so I listened. Over the next few weeks, I started seeing her more often, sometimes outside the store, sometimes rolling down the street with a basket on her lap. She'd always smile and wave, and I'd always stop to say hello. Before long, it became routine, a pattern that gave my empty days meaning. I started dropping by her house every now and then, especially when the weather got colder. Her porch had a loose board that made her wheelchair wobble, so one afternoon I brought my old toolbox and fixed it up. She tried to pay me, but I waved her off. "Just being neighborly," I said. She smiled, a real one this time, not the polite kind, and invited me in for coffee. That's how it began. Morning coffee turned into afternoon visits. Afternoon visits turned into dinner sometimes. She'd tell me stories about her old library job, about how she used to read to the kids every Saturday morning, doing all the funny voices. She said she missed that. I told her about the house I built for my wife, about how we used to sit on the porch and watch thunderstorms roll over the mountains. For the first time in years, I felt like someone saw me again, not as an old man counting down the days, but as a person who still had something left to give. I started bringing her groceries once a week, making sure her house stayed warm through the cold months. I even built her a little ramp outside her porch so she could move around more easily. The neighbors started noticing too. Some would smile knowingly, whisper about the nice old man helping the poor woman. I didn't care what they thought. Helping her made me feel whole again, like I was finally useful, like I had a purpose after so long drifting through life without one. Sometimes when I saw the way she looked at me with gratitude and warmth, I felt something deeper, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since my wife passed. But I pushed it down. I told myself it wasn't like that. I was just being kind. Then, one evening, as I was about to leave, she said something that stuck with me. She was sitting by the window watching the sunset. Her voice was quiet. "You ever feel like you were meant to find someone at the exact right time?" she asked. I didn't know how to answer that. I just nodded. "Yeah," I said softly. "Maybe we were both meant to find each other." That moment, that tiny fragile moment, felt like the start of something new. Something honest. But I was too blind to see that it was the beginning of a story that would twist into something darker than I could have ever imagined. Because while I thought I was helping her heal, while I thought I was building her back up from the wreckage of her past, I didn't realize that she'd already started building something too, something around me. A web of lies so carefully spun that by the time I saw the threads, I was already caught, and that right there was the beginning of my kindness and the slow, quiet start of my undoing. It's strange how when you look back, the truth is always there, hiding in plain sight. Like faint cracks in a wall that you tell yourself are just part of the paint, until one day the whole thing caves in. I see it all now, every small sign, every odd detail I ignored. But back then I was blind by choice. Or maybe I was just desperate to believe that good people still existed. Anna had a way about her, calm, polite, always gentle with her words. You'd never think she was capable of deceit. She moved slow, spoke softer than a breeze, and looked at you with eyes that made you want to trust her. That was her power. She made you feel safe. And in that safety, she planted her lies. The first signs were so subtle I barely noticed them. Sometimes, when I'd stop by early in the morning, before the sun had fully climbed over the pine trees, I'd find her wheelchair positioned differently than the day before. It would be angled slightly toward the window or a few inches away from where I'd last seen it. Small changes, the kind your brain dismisses. I told myself maybe she'd used her arms to push herself around a little, or maybe someone from the neighborhood had stopped by and moved it. It was easy to explain away because back then I didn't want to question her, but it wasn't just the wheelchair. Once I came by unannounced. I'd baked a loaf of banana bread and thought she might like some. When I knocked, I heard a noise inside. Not the sound of wheels scraping across the floor, but heavy footsteps, quick like someone startled. Then a thump upstairs followed by silence. When she finally opened the door, her hair was a little messy and she looked flushed, startled even. I remember asking, "Everything okay?" Thought I heard something upstairs. She hesitated, just for a second, and then smiled. "Oh, that?" My neighbor dropped by earlier. I think she forgot her purse upstairs. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right. The houses around here weren't exactly close together. Her nearest neighbor was nearly half a block away, an old widower named Hank who barely left his place. There was no she, but I didn't push, because that's what loneliness does. It convinces you to accept answers that don't make sense just to keep the peace. And then there were the phone calls. At first, I didn't think much of them. Everyone's got family, right? But Anna's phone would ring at odd hours, late evenings, sometimes past midnight. I'd be in the kitchen fixing something or bringing in groceries, and she'd step out of the room with that same polite smile saying, "It's just my sister from Texas. She worries too much." Now I was born and raised in Austin. I know a Texan accent when I hear one, and whoever was on that phone didn't sound like anyone from Texas. Their voice, muffled though it was, carried a different tone, sharper, maybe northern, maybe something else. I caught fragments sometimes, her voice dropping low, hurried whispers. Once I heard her say, "No, not yet. He doesn't suspect anything." When I asked her about it, she laughed it off, waving her hand. "Oh, Richard, you must have misheard. My sister's got a bit of a dramatic streak, always talking like she's in a movie." I smiled and pretended to believe her, because truth be told, I wanted to. When you've spent years with nothing but your own thoughts for company, trust starts to feel like oxygen. You need it, even if it's poisoned. One evening, I was under her kitchen sink fixing a leaky pipe, the kind of small job I'd done 1,000 times in my life. She was sitting at the table, her hands folded neatly, watching me work. The only sound in the room was the steady drip of water and the hum of the old refrigerator. Then she spoke. "Richard," she said softly, her voice almost thoughtful, "do you ever think people only help others because they want something in return?" I froze mid-turn of the wrench. The question caught me off guard. I turned my head just enough to look at her. "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged, eyes fixed on me with that calm, unreadable look. "Just wondering. Sometimes I think people don't really do kind things out of love. They do it to feel good about themselves." I chuckled, trying to shake off the unease that crept into my chest. "Well, maybe that's not so bad," I said, half joking. "If feeling good means fixing someone's leaky sink, I guess I'll take it." She smiled at that. But it wasn't the warm, grateful smile I was used to. It was faint, tight, like she knew something I didn't. Her eyes lingered a second too long, searching mine as if she was studying my reaction. There was something almost predatory in that silence that followed. I didn't recognize it then. I told myself I was imagining things, but looking back I can see it clear as day. That was the moment I realized she wasn't the fragile woman I thought she was. She was measuring me, testing the edges of how far I'd go for her. From then on, little oddities began to stack up like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. Sometimes she'd mention things about me she shouldn't have known, details I'd never told her, like the name of the street where my wife and I first lived, or the exact date my son stopped calling. I remember asking, "How'd you know that?" And she'd laugh it off, saying, "Oh, maybe you mentioned it once." But I hadn't. There was also the time I noticed a second set of tire tracks leading up her driveway, smaller than my truck's, newer. When I asked about it, she said a social worker stopped by to check on her, but there was no social worker listed in town records when I checked later. Every piece on its own seemed harmless, explainable, but together, they painted a picture I wasn't ready to see. And maybe that's why I didn't. Maybe part of me didn't want to know, because knowing would mean admitting that everything I'd built with Anna, the trust, the companionship, the fragile hope that maybe life wasn't done being kind, was a lie. So I kept showing up. I kept fixing things, bringing her groceries, listening to her talk about old books and memories that might not have even been hers. And each time I told myself, you're just imagining things, Richard. You're tired, that's all. But deep down, somewhere beneath the denial and the loneliness, a quiet voice kept whispering that something wasn't right. And that voice would soon be proven right in the worst possible way. It was a Friday night. The kind of night that seeps into your bones cold and heavy. The world outside drowned beneath sheets of rain. Storms in Idaho can come hard and fast that time of year. The wind howled through the trees, branches thrashed against windows, and thunder rolled over the mountains like a warning from something bigger than all of us. I was sitting in my living room, reading an old carpentry magazine I'd already flipped through a dozen times before, when the power flickered once, twice, then the lights went out completely. I sighed, grabbed my flashlight from the drawer, and sat there in the quiet, listening to the rain hammer the roof. It was then that I thought of Anna. Her little house was older than mine, and I knew her wiring wasn't in great shape. She'd mentioned before that the breaker tripped whenever she used the microwave and toaster at the same time. I imagined her there in the dark, alone, scared, maybe unable to move from her wheelchair. And something in me just reacted. I didn't even hesitate. I threw on my coat, grabbed the flashlight, and drove the few blocks to her place. The road was slick with rain, my windshield wipers struggling to keep up. Each flash of lightning lit up the trees and houses like a camera flash capturing a ghost town. When I turned onto Birch Street, something felt off right away. Her house was dark, sure, but that wasn't unusual during a power outage. What was unusual was the front door, slightly open, not wide enough to see in, but cracked just enough for the storm wind to push it back and forth. My gut twisted. I parked, killed the engine, and stepped out into the rain. The gravel crunched under my boots as I made my way to the porch. The door creaked softly, swaying with the wind. I remember my heart pounding. Not in fear exactly, but in that uneasy rhythm you get when something feels wrong before you even know why. "Anna?" I called out, raising my flashlight. "You in there?" No answer. I took a step inside. The air felt heavy still, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, sweeping across the living room. Everything looked normal at first. Her couch, her little bookshelf, the framed photo of her smiling at some park I'd never been to. And then I saw it, her wheelchair. It was sitting in the middle of the living room, not by the window where she always kept it, but turned slightly facing the stairs. Empty. My chest tightened. I took another step forward slowly, my boots squeaking against the wet floorboards. The rain outside grew louder, like it was trying to drown out the sound of what was about to happen. "Anna?" I said again, quieter this time. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They came from above, faint at first, then clearer. Slow, steady steps on the second floor. I froze, the beam of my flashlight trembling against the wall. My mind tried to reason with itself. Maybe someone broke in. Maybe her neighbor, the one who supposedly visited sometimes. But deep down another thought whispered, one that didn't make sense, one I refused to believe. No, she can't. I took another step forward. The floorboards creaked beneath me, each sound echoing like a countdown. The air felt colder as I moved toward the stairs, my flashlight cutting a shaky line up the banister. And then I saw her. Anna, standing at the top of the stairs, perfectly upright. No limp, no strain, no wheelchair. Just standing there, barefoot, wearing that same blue cardigan, her face pale in the beam of my light. Her hair was loose, her eyes wide, caught between guilt and shock. Time stopped. For a moment I thought maybe I'd lost my mind. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe the storm outside had thrown me into some cruel hallucination. But she was real. Her chest rose and fell, her shadow stretched across the stairs. She froze like a child caught doing something forbidden. "Richard," she started, but her voice barely reached me through the pounding of blood in my ears. My flashlight shook in my hand. I could hear the rain slapping against the windows, the wind whistling through the crack in the door behind me. You can walk?" I whispered. My voice came out hoarse, strangled by disbelief. She didn't answer right away. Her lips trembled, eyes glistening with something that almost looked like tears. Then she closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. "I can explain." Explain. That word. God, that word hit me harder than any punch could have. There was no explanation that could fit the size of what I felt. Months of trust. Months of care, compassion, and belief, shattered in one moment. Everything I'd done for her, the groceries, the porch repairs, the mornings spent reading to her, all built on a lie. I remember stepping back, my heart hammering so loud I thought it might break through my chest. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but all that came out was a laugh. A hollow, broken laugh that didn't sound like it belonged to me. "Explain?" I said, my voice rising despite the lump in my throat. "You told everyone you couldn't walk. You told me you were paralyzed." Her eyes darted toward the window, then back at me. "It's not what you think. Then what is it, Anna?" I cut her off, my words sharper than I intended. "Because it looks like I've been taking care of someone who didn't need taking care of." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, but I couldn't tell if they were real or just another part of her performance. She took one hesitant step down and I instinctively stepped back, flashlight trembling in my grip. "Please, Richard," she said, her voice soft, pleading. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but it was too late for that." Every memory, every shared coffee, every smile, every time she'd looked at me with those kind eyes, suddenly felt poisoned. I saw it all for what it was, a performance. And I was the fool in the front row, clapping like an idiot. The storm outside roared louder, the wind banging the door against the wall. I could barely see through the haze of betrayal clouding my vision. "Just tell me why?" I finally managed, my voice breaking. "Why lie about something like that?" She opened her mouth, maybe to answer, maybe to spin another story, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned, stepped out into the rain and slammed the door behind me. The sound echoed in the storm. Sharp, final. As I stood there, soaked through, staring at the flickering porch light, I realized something deep down in my bones. The woman I thought I knew, the one I pitied, the one I helped, never really existed. She was a mask, a ghost built from lies and half-truths, and that night didn't just change how I saw Anna. It changed how I saw myself, because the truth wasn't just that she could walk. The truth was that I'd been blind, willfully, completely blind, to everything she'd been doing right in front of me. And the worst part? That was only the beginning of what she'd done. That night I barely slept. Her words kept echoing in my head like the ticking of a clock that wouldn't stop. Because I needed someone to believe I was harmless. It sounded so simple, yet it carried a strange weight. Like there was something underneath it. Something I wasn't seeing. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe she had been hurt. Maybe she'd lied because she was scared. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces didn't fit. If she was hiding from someone, why had I seen her standing by the window some nights, talking on the phone so casually? Why were there new tire marks in her driveway every few weeks and from cars I didn't recognize? Why did I sometimes catch her looking at me like she was calculating something instead of confiding in me? I started to notice more. The receipts in her trash can, fancy wine, expensive candles, even men's cologne. Not the kind of things you buy when you're supposedly living in fear and isolation. Once I even saw a gold bracelet on her wrist, something she claimed she sold years ago to pay for her medical bills. The web of her lies stretched wider the closer I looked. Still, I wanted to believe her, because believing her meant my kindness hadn't been wasted. It meant the hours I spent fixing her house, cooking for her, and making her laugh weren't all built on deceit. But deep down, I knew something was off. A few days later, she showed up again, this time with baked bread in her hands, like nothing had happened. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, setting the loaf on my counter, "for everything, for not giving up on me." Her voice trembled, and for a moment I saw the same fragile woman I'd once believed she was. But when she turned to grab a plate, I noticed her phone light up on the table. A message flashed across the screen. Just one word that made my stomach twist. "Soon." She snatched the phone before I could read more. "Just my sister," she said quickly, but her voice cracked on the word, sister. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Soon what? I started watching her from a distance, not out of paranoia, but out of a quiet, growing dread. Sometimes she'd leave late at night, walking briskly down the street, completely forgetting the limp she sometimes pretended to have. Other times, I'd catch the flicker of a car's headlights outside her house, and she'd come back inside smiling like she'd just sealed a secret deal. The mask she wore during the day was beginning to slip. One evening, as I sat in my truck outside her house, I saw her through the window, laughing with someone. A man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and definitely not a stranger to her. He touched her arm in a way that spoke of familiarity, not fear. And that's when it hit me. Her story about Kevin, her abusive ex, wasn't just a lie. It was a cover. For what I didn't yet know. But one thing was clear. I wasn't the savior in her story. I was just another pawn in whatever game she was playing. When I confronted her the next day, she didn't flinch. She simply smiled. That same faint, practiced smile that used to warm me, now cold and hollow. "Richard," she said, her tone calm, almost pitying. "You're not as good at seeing people as you think." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean?" She just shrugged like she'd already grown bored of the conversation. "You wanted to be needed. I just gave you what you were looking for. That was it. No apology, no regret, just truth, sharp and unapologetic." And that was the moment I realized every word, every glance, every tear she'd shown me. It had all been part of something bigger. A story I'd never agreed to be part of. The web she spun wasn't random. It had a purpose, and I was right in the center of it. For the first time in my life, I felt real fear. The kind that crawls into your bones and makes every creak of the floor sound like a warning. I sat there in the shed with that phone glowing in my palm, my reflection flickering in its dark screen, and I could feel my whole world shifting. Every memory with her, every shared breakfast, every conversation on that quiet porch, twisted into something poisonous. The photos were detailed. Some were zoomed in from a distance, grainy but clear enough to make out my expression. Me walking to the store, me fixing her porch railing, even one of me sitting on my couch through the front window. That one made my stomach turn. It meant she'd been near my house, watching, waiting. I checked the timestamps, and all recent. Some even taken at times when she'd been sitting right across from me, pretending to sip her coffee, pretending to smile. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was proof. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages. They weren't just sent to her, and they were from her too. Lines of text that didn't make sense at first. "He's getting close. I'll have him ready soon. The papers will be signed." Signed? What papers? Then there were numbers. A bank account, maybe. A set of coordinates. A few cryptic words like property transfer, verification, and one chilling phrase that froze the blood in my veins. He trusts me completely now. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe she was working for the police. Maybe she'd been protecting herself, gathering evidence. But the more I told myself that, the less it sounded true. There was no badge. No order, no sense of justice in what I saw, just cold. Deliberate manipulation. I went inside, locked the doors, and sat at my kitchen table again. The same place I'd once waited for her to knock with that warm smile and that soft voice. Now even her memory made the walls feel smaller. The next morning, I drove into town and parked near the general store, pretending to browse newspapers while watching her house from across the street. The curtains were drawn, but I saw movement, a silhouette, a man's shadow pacing near her window. So there was someone else, the same man I'd seen once before laughing with her. It all began to line up. The fake paralysis, the secret phone calls, the messages, the coded words. It was a setup. But for what? Money? Revenge? Something darker? Later that day, I went to the police. I told them everything, or at least enough to sound sane. The officer, a young guy who looked barely old enough to shave, took my statement with that half-interested expression people use when they think they're humoring an old man. He flipped through the photos on the phone, nodded and said, "Could be a prank, or maybe she's just documenting stuff. People do weird things online these days." He handed the phone back like it was nothing. That's when I realized I was on my own. When I got home, my mailbox was open again. This time there was a note inside, just a torn piece of paper with 5 words written in neat cursive. "You shouldn't have gone there." No signature. No smudges. Just clean, deliberate handwritings, hers. My pulse pounded in my ears. I scanned the street, empty. But I could feel her eyes on me. Somewhere from some dark window she was watching. That night I double-checked every lock, pulled the blinds, and sat in the dark with my old hunting rifle propped by the door. The clock ticked louder than usual, each second dragging like a weight across my chest. But even as I waited, I couldn't stop thinking about that phone, about how carefully she'd built this, how calculated it all was. Every step had been planned. The chance meeting, the stories of abuse, the helplessness that drew me in. It wasn't kindness she wanted. It was control, and I was the perfect target. A retired man, living alone, with a paid-off house and a reputation for helping others. Easy to manipulate, easy to frame, easy to erase. That realization hit me so hard that I stood up and checked my files. Bank papers, insurance documents, old letters from my son. And then I saw it. One of my property deeds was missing. It had been right there, in the brown folder I always kept on the shelf. Now the folder was still there, but the deed was gone. I didn't need to guess where it went. Suddenly, the messages on the phone made sense. He trusts me completely now. The papers will be signed. I'll have him ready soon. It wasn't just emotional manipulation. She'd been planning to take everything, my land, my savings, maybe even my name. And as the storm clouds rolled in that night, I realized something else. The setup wasn't over. It had just begun. Because somewhere in that darkness, Anna was still moving her pieces, and I was still the king she planned to topple. I didn't think. I just drove. The snow sprayed behind my tires as I tore down that narrow, half-frozen road toward Anna's house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The night air stung my lungs. I wasn't thinking clearly. Rage had taken over, a kind of desperate fury that comes when everything you thought was real turns to dust in your hands. When I got there, her driveway was half empty. No lights on, no sound. Her front door was unlocked again, just hanging open like it was waiting for me. I stepped inside, half expecting her to be there, half hoping she would be. But the moment I looked around, I knew she was gone. The house was stripped bare, half the furniture gone, drawers pulled out, clothes missing. Even the photographs on the walls, those fake snapshots of her old life, were gone. What was left were impressions on the walls, faint rectangles where the frames had hung. The curtains were ripped down, lying in the corner like she'd left in a hurry or someone had dragged them off in a panic. The air smelled different too, like cleaning fluid and cold metal. A rushed goodbye, then I saw it. A folded note on the kitchen table weighed down by a single spoon. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. It was written in that same neat cursive from the warning note in my mailbox. You were never supposed to find out. I needed someone the world would believe. And they always believe the man who helps the helpless. I read it over and over until the words blurred. What did it mean? Someone the world would believe? Believe what? I stumbled back, my breath shallow. I didn't even have time to piece it together before I saw the flashing lights outside. Blue and red cutting through the falling snow. The police. 2 officers stepped out of the car, their boots crunching on the ice. My first thought was relief. They'd come about my report, maybe they'd found something. But their expressions told me otherwise. Richard Moore, one of the masked flashlight pointed at my chest. Yes, I said slowly. Is something wrong? You need to come with us, sir. My stomach dropped. For what? There's been a report filed against you, the younger officer said, voice flat, rehearsed. Harassment, stalking, trespassing. I felt like the ground had just vanished under me. What the hell are you talking about? They exchanged glances the way cops do when they already think they know the story. It's about a woman named Anna Reed, the older one said. She claims you've been following her, taking pictures of her home, entering her property without consent. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of sick joke. But then I remembered the phone. The photos. The ones I'd found in my shed, the ones she had taken. My heart sank. She set me up, I said quietly, almost to myself. Those pictures aren't mine, she planted them. The older cop sighed, rubbing his chin. You're saying the photos in her statement were fabricated? I'm saying they were hers. They were in my shed, hidden under a tarp. She must have put them there. But my words felt thin, fragile. I could hear how they sounded out loud. A desperate old man trying to untangle a lie too carefully spun. Mr. Moore, the younger one said, tone cooling. She's provided more than photos. There are messages, emails. She says you threatened her when she tried to end your friendship. I shook my head violently. That's not true. I've never written her, but then I froze. Because I had all those little texts over the months. Let me know if you need help. I'll stop by later with dinner. Are you okay? You didn't answer this morning. Out of context, they could look bad. I didn't threaten her, I whispered. I was helping her. She told me she couldn't walk. But the police weren't there for explanations. They were there to process a report. I wasn't handcuffed. but they asked me to come down to the station for questioning. I could feel every neighbor's eyes on me as they guided me to the car. Curtains fluttered. Someone whispered. Someone else pointed. By the time they let me go that night, after hours of sterile questioning and sideways glances, the damage had already been done. The story spread faster than truth ever could. Old man harasses disabled woman. Local carpenter accused of stalking. Victim says she feared for her life. The town that once smiled at me now crossed the street when I walked by. The barista who used to keep my usual ready suddenly pretended not to see me. Even the mailman avoided eye contact, and deep down, the part that hurt the most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how easily the world believed her. She had crafted it perfectly. The frail woman in the wheelchair, soft-spoken, tragic. The man with rough hands, a temper, a lonely past. The story wrote itself. I sat in my living room that night, the police paperwork spread across my coffee table, the note still crumpled in my hand. Her words echoed in my head. I needed someone the world would believe. She didn't just manipulate me. She used me as a mask. She'd wanted credibility, sympathy, someone to anchor her lies to. And I'd been too blind, too desperate for connection to see it happening. I looked around my house, the same walls that once felt warm now closing in. My wife's old photo sat on the mantel, her smile soft, eternal. I whispered to it like a confession. I thought I was saving someone, I said. Turns out I was the one being used. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Snow fell heavier. The world felt quieter than it ever had before. That night I didn't sleep. Because for the first time I realized this wasn't over. She'd taken my reputation. But something told me she wasn't done yet. And the worst part? I still didn't know what she really wanted from me. For weeks after that accusation, my world was smaller than a single room. I barely left my house except for groceries. The curtains stayed shut most days because I couldn't handle the looks. The way neighbors paused mid-step when they saw me, or how they'd turn away pretending to check their phones. I'd never felt shame like that before, not even when I lost my wife. The worst part wasn't the police visit. It wasn't even the whispers. It was when my son called from Oregon. Dad, he said, his voice tight, cautious. What the hell did you do? He didn't even give me the benefit of the doubt. My own son, who barely called once every few months, now suddenly had time to lecture me. I tried to explain, but halfway through I realized he'd already decided what to believe. The call ended with silence. That silence was heavier than anything. I thought about packing up, selling the house, moving somewhere where no one knew my name. Start over, maybe in some nameless small town across the state line. But something inside me refused. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, but I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. Still, the days blurred together. The coffee went cold before I finished it. The evening stretched into long, empty hours of replaying every conversation I'd had with her, every smile, every lie I didn't see. Then one night, about 3 weeks after the police visit, I decided to step outside. The air was sharp, the kind of Idaho cold that bites through your jacket. I drove downtown just to feel like a person again. That's when I saw her. I was at a stoplight near the square when I caught sight of a woman walking out of a restaurant. Her hair was different, shorter, darker, but there was no mistaking that face. Anna. Or the woman I thought was Anna. She wasn't in a wheelchair. Not even limping. She was walking just fine, and she wasn't alone. A man was with her. Tall, clean-shaven, expensive jacket. He had his hand on her back as they laughed and stepped out into the streetlight. She looked happy, carefree, like the months she'd spent spinning me into her web had never even happened. Something inside me twisted. I wasn't angry, not yet. It was more like disbelief, like my mind couldn't catch up to what my eyes were seeing. She'd destroyed my reputation, left me humiliated, and here she was smiling under the street lamps like none of it mattered. I didn't think. I just followed, not to confront her, not to hurt her. I just needed to understand, needed to see where this story really ended. They got into a black SUV parked a few blocks down. I followed at a distance, keeping my headlights dim. They drove about 10 minutes out of town to a quiet neighborhood near the lake, one of those newly built areas with perfect lawns and glassy front doors. I parked half a block away and watched. They went inside like they lived there. Her gate was smooth. No hesitation, no weakness. The woman who once told me she couldn't move from the waist down was now jogging up the porch steps. That image stayed with me all night. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and sat at the table thinking about everything. About her story, her accident, her talk of abuse, of hiding, of needing safety. It was all smoke. A setup. So I did what she did. I started watching. It began small. I'd parked near the neighborhood just long enough to see if her car was there. Then I started keeping notes, license plates, times, visitors. I didn't even know why I was doing it at first. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed to know that I hadn't completely lost my mind. Over the next month, I found out more than I expected. Her real name wasn't Anna Reed. I learned that after spotting a package left on the doorstep one afternoon while she and the man were out. The shipping label read Melanie Carter. That name sent a chill through me. It was too deliberate, too practiced. I went home and searched that name online. It took hours, but eventually I found a buried article from a small-town newspaper in Montana. A Melanie Carter had been involved in a charity scam. The description matched her exactly, down to the cardigan color she used to wear. But the story didn't end there. The man she was with, his name was Kevin Dorsey. He'd been mentioned in the same article as a business partner, a man with a history of fraud, fake fundraisers, and small-town sympathy schemes. It all made sense now. They'd done this before. Moved from one small town to another, posing as victims or caretakers, weaving tales of accidents, tragedy, or illness. People donated money, offered help, opened their homes, and then, when enough goodwill turned into trust, they'd flip the narrative. Someone always ended up accused. Someone always lost everything. And this time, that someone was me. They didn't just lie for survival. They lied for profit, for control, for the thrill of watching people crumble under their web of deception. The deeper I looked, the more it felt like the walls of my mind were closing in. Every memory with her replayed itself in cruel detail. The way she'd smiled when I said I trusted her. The softness in her voice when she said, "You're the only one who really sees me." God, she must have laughed about that later. But here's the thing. I wasn't powerless anymore. The humiliation, the whispering, the shame. It had burned away something inside me, left something harder, sharper in its place. I decided that if she could watch, so could I. If she could plan, so could I. The man I used to be, the one who fixed her porch steps, who read her the paper and brought her breakfast, he was gone. In his place stood someone who wanted the truth, no matter how deep he had to dig for it. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night everything shifted. The moment the victim inside me died, and the man who'd lost everything began to take it back. For weeks after that accusation, my world was smaller than a single room. I barely left my house except for groceries. The curtains stayed shut most days because I couldn't handle the looks, the way neighbors paused mid-step when they saw me, or how they'd turn away, pretending to check their phones. I'd never felt shame like that before, not even when I lost my wife. The worst part wasn't the police visit. It wasn't even the whispers. It was when my son called from Oregon. "Dad," he said, his voice tight, cautious. "What the hell did you do?" He didn't even give me the benefit of the doubt. My own son, who barely called once every few months, now suddenly had time to lecture me. I tried to explain, but halfway through I realized he'd already decided what to believe. The call ended with silence. That silence was heavier than anything. I thought about packing up, selling the house, moving somewhere where no one knew my name. Start over. Maybe in some nameless small town across the state line. But something inside me refused. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, but I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. Still, the days blurred together. The coffee went cold before I finished it. The evenings stretched into long, empty hours of replaying every conversation I'd had with her. Every smile, every lie I didn't see. Then one night, about 3 weeks after the police visit, I decided to step outside. The air was sharp, the kind of Idaho cold that bites through your jacket. I drove downtown just to feel like a person again. That's when I saw her. I was at a stoplight near the square when I caught sight of a woman walking out of a restaurant. Her hair was different, shorter, darker, but there was no mistaking that face. Anna. Or the woman I thought was Anna. She wasn't in a wheelchair. Not even limping. She was walking just fine, and she wasn't alone. A man was with her, tall, clean-shaven, expensive jacket. He had his hand on her back as they laughed and stepped out into the streetlight. She looked happy, carefree, like the months she'd spent spinning me into her web had never even happened. Something inside me twisted. I wasn't angry, not yet. It was more like disbelief, like my mind couldn't catch up to what my eyes were seeing. She'd destroyed my reputation, left me humiliated, and here she was, smiling under the street lamps like none of it mattered. I didn't think. I just followed, not to confront her, not to hurt her. I just needed to understand, needed to see where this story really ended. They got into a black SUV parked a few blocks down. I followed at a distance, keeping my headlights dim. They drove about 10 minutes out of town to a quiet neighborhood near the lake, one of those newly built areas with perfect lawns and glassy front doors. I parked half a block away and watched. They went inside like they lived there. Her gait was smooth. No hesitation, no weakness. The woman who once told me she couldn't move from the waist down was now jogging up the porch steps. That image stayed with me all night. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and sat at the table, thinking about everything. About her story, her accident, her talk of abuse, of hiding, of needing safety. It was all smoke. A setup, so I did what she did. I started watching. It began small. I'd parked near the neighborhood, just long enough to see if her car was there. Then I started keeping notes, license plates, times, visitors. I didn't even know why I was doing it at first. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed to know that I hadn't completely lost my mind. Over the next month, I found out more than I expected. Her real name wasn't Anna Reed. I learned that after spotting a package left on the doorstep one afternoon while she and the man were out. The shipping label read, Melanie Carter. That name sent a chill through me. It was too deliberate, too practiced. I went home and searched that name online. It took hours, but eventually, I found a buried article from a small-town newspaper in Montana. Melanie Carter had been involved in a charity scam. The description matched her exactly, down to the cardigan color she used to wear. But the story didn't end there. The man she was with, his name was Kevin Dorsey. He'd been mentioned in the same article as a business partner, a man with a history of fraud, fake fundraisers, and small-town sympathy schemes. It all made sense now. They'd done this before. Moved from one small town to another, posing as victims or caretakers, weaving tales of accidents, tragedy, or illness. People donated money, offered help, opened their homes, and then, when enough goodwill turned into trust, they'd flip the narrative. Someone always ended up accused. Someone always lost everything. And this time that someone was me. They didn't just lie for survival. They lied for profit, for control, for the thrill of watching people crumble under their web of deception. The deeper I looked, the more it felt like the walls of my mind were closing in. Every memory with her replayed itself in cruel detail. The way she'd smiled when I said I trusted her. The softness in her voice when she said, "You're the only one who really sees me." God, she must have laughed about that later. But here's the thing, I wasn't powerless anymore. The humiliation, the whispering, the shame, it had burned away something inside me, left something harder, sharper in its place. I decided that if she could watch, so could I. If she could plan, so could I. The man I used to be, the one who fixed her porch steps, who read her the paper and brought her breakfast, he was gone. In his place stood someone who wanted the truth, no matter how deep he had to dig for it. I didn't know it yet. But that was the night everything shifted. The moment the victim inside me died and the man who'd lost everything began to take it back. I could have gone straight to the police, sure. That's what any sane man would have done. But I wasn't a man anyone would believe anymore. My name had already been dragged through the mud, my reputation ground down until it was nothing but rumor and suspicion. In the eyes of the law, I was the one who'd crossed the line, the one who had stalked a disabled woman. If I'd gone back to the cops with talk of her new name, her new partner, and their cons, I knew exactly what would have happened. They'd nod politely, write nothing down, and forget my face the second I walked out the door. So I did something smarter. I decided to build the kind of truth that couldn't be ignored. At first, I didn't even know where to begin. I wasn't some detective. I was a retired carpenter who barely understood how to use half the apps on my phone, but anger has a way of sharpening the mind. So I started small. I bought a second-hand camera from a pawn shop and a cheap pair of binoculars from the hardware store. Parked my truck a few streets away from her new place. Every day I noted what time she left, who she met, what car pulled up outside. I recorded everything: dates, license plates, faces. Sometimes I sat there for hours, my hands numb on the steering wheel, just waiting. But every time I caught her laughing, walking without a hint of pain, or hugging some poor stranger who thought she was recovering, it reignited something cold and steady inside me. I wasn't spying anymore. I was collecting proof. Over the next month, I pieced together their entire scam. She'd changed her story again. This time, she told people she was a widowed nurse with nerve damage from a hospital accident. The man, Kevin, played the doting partner who worked long hours to keep her treatments going. They used the same lines, the same fake medical documents, even the same charity setup under a slightly different name. They were good, professional even. They knew how to cry on cue, how to make people feel like heroes for helping. I watched them reel in a local church group, then a small-town charity that raised money for disabled residents in need. Within weeks, donations started flowing. I saw envelopes of cash being handed over, people leaving groceries on their porch, one man even giving them his old truck to make things easier. Every night I logged it all. I created folders, labeled photos, time-stamped everything. I even learned how to record audio from a distance. The first time I captured them talking openly about splitting the haul, I nearly dropped the recorder. "Don't worry," she said to Kevin, her voice sharp with confidence. "These small towns are always the easiest. They want to feel good about themselves," he laughed. "You're getting better at this every year." "I learned from the best," she replied. That line burned into my mind. After 2 months of watching, I had more than enough. But I didn't go to the police. I went somewhere that could make it impossible for anyone to bury the truth. There was a local journalist in Boise named Tyler Hensley, known for digging into corruption and scams. I'd read his stories before. He didn't scare easy, and he hated being lied to. So one night I packaged everything: the videos, the recordings, the documents, even the photos of them together. I didn't sign my name. I just included a note. "You want the story of the year? Start with Melanie Carter and Kevin Dorsey." I mailed it from a town 2 hours away just to keep myself out of the crosshairs. And then I waited. 2 weeks passed in silence, then 3. I started to think maybe it hadn't worked, that maybe he'd thrown it away, or that they'd somehow found out and disappeared again. But then one cold Tuesday morning, I walked into the corner diner and saw something that made my hands shake so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Her face, on the front page of the Idaho Tribune. Couple exposed for faking disabilities and scamming Good Samaritans across Idaho. Below it, a full spread, photos of her walking, of him counting money, of their fake charity websites. Every lie laid out in black and white. The article called them career con artists and linked them to multiple small-town fraud cases spanning 3 states. Her name, his name, their faces, everything out in the open. It was like breathing after months underwater. For the first time in almost a year, I felt something close to peace. Not triumph, just quiet relief. I didn't go out and celebrate. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. I just sat at my kitchen table, the newspaper spread in front of me, and finally, I exhaled. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. The kind of deep, heavy sleep where your body finally stops bracing for the next blow. The next morning, the phone rang. It was my son. "Dad," he said, his voice softer this time. "I saw the news. I didn't say anything. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I wanted to tell him it was okay. But all I could manage was, it's over." And in a way, it was. Melanie and Kevin were arrested 3 days later in Wyoming, trying to cross into Colorado. They'd been planning to start over under new names. The authorities credited an anonymous tip for exposing them. I never came forward, never asked for recognition. It was enough to know they couldn't hurt anyone else. But here's the thing. After everything, after all the lies and humiliation, I still couldn't bring myself to hate her. Maybe that sounds foolish. Maybe it is foolish. But hate's a heavy thing to carry, and I'd already carried enough. In the quiet that followed, I kept thinking about something she once said to me early on. back when I thought she was just a woman trying to heal. She said, "People believe what makes them feel good, not what's true." I think she believed that too much. She'd built her whole life around pretending, around making people see what they wanted to see. And in the end, she fooled even herself, because no matter how many lies she spun, no matter how much pity she stole, she couldn't escape the truth forever. I don't know where she is now. Probably in some prison yard, telling someone a new version of her story. Maybe in that one, she's the victim again. Maybe in her mind, she always will be. As for me, I fixed up the house, reconnected with my son, started volunteering at a local shelter, not because I wanted to be seen as good, but because I finally understood that kindness means nothing without wisdom. If there's one thing I learned from all this, it's that sometimes the people we try hardest to save are the ones who will teach us how dangerous blind compassion can be. Everyone thought she was helpless, and maybe she was, just not in the way we all imagined, because the truth about her condition wasn't that she couldn't walk, it was that she couldn't stop running from herself. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come with shouting or rage. They come wrapped in soft voices, trembling hands, and eyes that seem full of pain. That's the kind of betrayal that sneaks into your heart quietly, where you least expect it. It doesn't destroy you all at once. It unravels you, thread by thread, until you're standing in front of the truth with nothing left but the echo of your own disbelief. That's what it was with her, with Anna, or Melanie, or whatever her name truly was. She wasn't just cruel. She wasn't a villain in the way stories like to paint them. She was something far sadder, far more dangerous. She was lost. A person who had told so many lies that she'd forgotten the shape of the truth. She had built a world out of deception, brick by brick, lie by lie, and then locked herself inside it. At first, I thought she'd done it for money, for sympathy, for survival. But the more I thought about her, the more I realized it wasn't just greed. It was need, a hunger to be seen, to be felt, to matter in a world that might have ignored her long before she started faking stories. Some people don't crave love. They crave control over how others see them, and when that control slips away, they'll burn everything, even themselves, mere to get it back. I remember standing in my yard one evening, long after everything had happened. The light was soft, the air still, the kind of evening where the world feels like it's finally quiet enough to think. I looked over at that old porch where she used to sit, that image of her wrapped in a blue cardigan, pretending she couldn't move her legs, asking me about my day as if she cared. For a long time, I couldn't even look at that porch without feeling bitterness twist inside me. But that night, something changed. I didn't see a monster anymore. I saw a broken person who had built her own prison. I saw someone so terrified of being invisible that she'd rather live a lie than face the emptiness of truth. That was the night I forgave her. Not for her sake. She didn't deserve that kind of peace. I forgave her for mine. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about cutting the rope that ties you to the pain. I spent 9 years caring for someone I thought was paralyzed. Feeding her, lifting her, bathing her, giving her pieces of my life without ever asking for anything back. And when I found out it was all a performance, the part that hurt the most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how easily I had offered everything, without once stopping to protect myself. That's the hardest truth to face. Not how someone deceived you, but how you allowed it because you wanted to believe in the goodness of another person. And that's what this story really taught me. Kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-destruction disguised as compassion. It's leaving your door open in a storm and wondering why the water keeps flooding in. If you're listening to this, if you've ever helped someone who seemed broken, fragile, desperate, don't stop being kind. The world doesn't need less kindness. It just needs clearer eyes. Help people, but don't hand them your soul. Love people, but don't let them make your heart their hiding place, because some people don't actually want healing. They don't want to climb out of their darkness. They want company in it. They want witnesses, not rescuers. They want someone to keep the lights on while they perform their tragedy again and again, until the sympathy runs out. And when it does, they'll just find another audience. That's the cycle people like her live in. Not because they're evil, but because the truth terrifies them more than the pain of pretending. Even now, years later, I still drive past that old house sometimes. The grass has grown tall, the mailbox leans a little to one side, and the porch that once held her chair is bare. The blue cardigan, that one she always wore, the one that fooled the whole neighborhood, it's gone. Maybe thrown away, maybe burned. But in the stillness of that place, I can almost see the moment it all ended. The day the truth stood up, stretched its legs, and walked down those stairs. That's when I realized something. Truth doesn't need to shout to be powerful. It just waits, patiently. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't demand revenge or justice. It simply exists, unshakable, unchanging. So I keep that memory with me, not as a wound, but as a warning. Kindness is sacred, but only when it's balanced with wisdom. Love the world, yes, but don't lose yourself trying to fix the parts of it that don't want to be fixed. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away.